Morning. Today we are working with Max Weber and his thoughts on education. So I'll read the article. Please listen and remember as much as you can. So Max Weber is credited with numerous contributions to modern sociology and is considered one of the pillars of the discipline along with Karl Marx and Emil Durkheim. Marx was an established predecessor from Germany whose study of the 19th century European society was widely acknowledged, and Durkheim was a contemporary living in neighboring France. It is difficult to assess which of these three perspectives is more appropriate to the study of society, or in the words of Triquian, which one has a model of society that provides the best fit for the study of contemporary society. What is certain, however, is that these three thinkers together laid the foundation of the sociological imagination that emerged in the early part of the 20th century. While the three founders of sociology differed in their perspectives, approaches, and methods, they nevertheless shared some common areas of interest. The most common theme in the works of all three is the idea of structure and change in the society. They grappled with the changing nature of contemporary society and the ways in which this transformation affected the very structure and constitution of it. They envisioned a society that was ideal, desirable, harmonious, and utopian. The grand themes in their works are economy, religion, law, and social order. All three use historical and comparative methods to arrive at an understanding of society. So, however, the core explanations of social change differ from each other in distinct ways. The classic writings of Marx, Weber, and Durkheim continue to be relevant even today in some form or the other, and each of these schools of thought produced the next generation of Marxists, Weberians, and Durkheimians, which further spawned to one more generation. However, these paradigmatic ideas and these three pioneers were very interesting. Max Weber was one more thinker that made a very large contribution to the study of actually economy and education as well. Weber was not solely or even primarily focused on education, but his examination of education is nevertheless central to an understanding of his notions of religion and politics. And as Bendix and Roth argue, were Weber's dominant intellectual interests. If you look at Weber's intellectual and personal life, we find that his interest in religion was influenced by his ascetic mother, and his interest in politics was largely driven by his father, who was an important member of the political elite of Germany. Although Weber began his academic career with the study of law, he soon shifted his focus to the comparative study of the transformation of societies in both the West and the East. He had always faced a dilemma about choosing scholarship or politics as his vocation. Finally, he decided to dedicate himself to the vocation of scholarship. However, he did try his hand at politics as well. He was a founding member of the German Democratic Party and spent considerable time and energy in political mobilization and on propagating the party's agenda and ideology. He ultimately grew disillusioned with the kind of culture emerging in the newly set up political party. Some of these experiences formed the basis for his explanation of complex social phenomena such as power, authority, leadership, bureaucracy, rationality, and organizations. And all of these elements also appear in his interpretation of modern education systems as well. But by the way, what is the relevance of education in the thesis of the Protestant ethic? Max Weber's first significant and perhaps most famous work, The Protestant Ethic in the Spirit of Capitalism, appeared shortly after his recovery from a long period of depression lasting from 1897 to 1904. It was written, presented in 1904, 1905, and most of Weber's works prior to his sickness were, as Giddens notes, technical researches in economic history, economics, and jurisprudence, and these were basically studies of trading laws, tenures, and the socio-economic conditions of rural workers. And these works typically fall under what may be called the historical school of economics. And now, after that, he writes the book, this Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And this is kind of the core works of him, of course. This is how he became very popular. And this Protestant Ethic is a major, indeed the most significant contribution by Weber to sociology. It is also his initial foray into the study of the role and importance of education. And although he does not place any special thrust on education in his discussion of Calvinism, ethics, and the capitalism turn, he does refer to the ideas of the educated in all of these topics. While posing the problem in the Protestant ethic, he outlines the distinction between Catholic worldliness and Protestant otherworldliness, which may be traced as the root of capitalism. For example, the first paragraph of the Protestant ethic begins: "A glance at the occupational statistics of any country of mixed religious composition brings to light with remarkable frequency a situation. The fact that business leaders and owners of capital, as well as the higher grades of skilled labor, and even more the technically and commercially trained personnel of modern enterprises, are overwhelmingly Protestant." So he actually starts it with a hinting, the target that Protestants are taking the place in the best positions, and then he explains the argument, and we'll go to education as soon as possible. He writes that it is true that greater participation of Protestants in the ownership of capital, in management, and in the upper ranks of labor in great modern industrial and commercial enterprises may in part be explained in terms of historical circumstances which extend far back into the past, and in which religious affiliation is not a cause of economic conditions, but to a certain extent appears to be a result of them. Participation in the above economic functions usually involves some previous ownership of capital, generally an expensive education, right? He writes in the second paragraph, he starts with education. For example, then he writes that there is a very great difference discoverable in Baden, in Bavaria, in Hungary, in the type of higher education which Catholic parents, as opposed to Protestant, gave their children. That the percentage of Catholics among the students and graduates of higher educational institutions in general lags behind their proportion of the population may, to be sure, be largely explicable in terms of inherited differences of wealth, but among the Catholic graduates themselves, the percentage of those graduating from the institutions preparing in particular for technical studies and industrial and commercial occupations, but in general from those preparing for middle-class business, lags still behind the percentage of Protestants. On the other hand, Catholics prefer to sort of training which the humanistic gymnasiums affords. That is a circumstance to which the above explanation does not apply, but which on the contrary is one reason why so few Catholics are engaged in capitalistic enterprise. So look, however, he links this, capitalistic tendencies to this predominantly Protestant societies, and he writes that education, wealth, and occupation are very much, linked, and that would become his major thrust in this theory of social class. And Weber's idea of social class, in contrast to Marx's notion, is widely used to the social sciences in analyzing the influence of modern capitalistic social stratification systems on the life chances of individuals and groups, including education. In the Protestant ethic, Weber introduces for the first time this notion of the middle class and its relationship with certain occupational and educational contexts. And although Weber's thinking pertains to Europe in the late 19th and early 20th century, some of his ideas, such as those explicated in the Protestant ethic, continue to be relevant even today. Well, the centrality of education in the development of capitalism and its crucial role in influencing the nature and conditions of work that are mainly premised on educational credentials have proven to be prescient in contemporary society, and this idea has provided a dependable alternative to the Marxian class theory as well as to the Marxian contest that remains entrenched in the 19th century idea of agriculture and manufacturing as being the only two cogs in the wheel of production. Imagine how Marx would interpret the dominance of the service sector and the emergence of a new class of capitalists with humble beginnings. It is this gap that Weber's visionary thesis failed, facilitating an analysis of alternative class and capitalistic political, social, and economic contests. And in this theory of multiple class hierarchies, it is education that is crucial for the attainment and preservation of social and economic status. His idea of status, honor, and credentialism in terms of education were subsequently used by the next generation of Weberians, and now Weberians to formulate explanations for the dysfunctions of advanced capitalistic society. Also, it's interesting that Weber's study of comparative religion equipped him with an understanding of why some societies in the West developed capitalism and why some societies in the East, such as India and China, did not do so. He studied the religions of India and China in order to explore the social forces and contexts that inhibited the emergence and growth of capitalism in these societies. Much of this analysis took place among almost 10 years after the publication of the Protestant Ethic. In Weber's examination of the sociological foundations of educational systems was largely a result of his exploration of Chinese society and religion in his essay, The Chinese Literati. In The Chinese Literati, Weber focuses on the specificities of the status group of the literati and on the nature, importance, and role of education and authority in Chinese society. He highlights that in most societies, education is not always exclusive. Access to it is not systematically barred, right? And in most all cases, it has an exclusionary role, distinguishing some from others. He argues that every society accords a premium role to education, and each society in its own way forms links between the structures of power, social status, and education. Access to education, even if it is open to all or to most people, doesn't guarantee success. And education under the influence and control of the powerful is the key to power and social status. It is this argument that Weber develops most effectively in his description of the Chinese literati. There is a definite relationship between power and administrative control and the educated class. Those in powerful or administrative positions influence and decide what qualities as valuable and worth education, and those who are educated feel the cadres of the administrative system. So essentially, those in power and in positions of administrative authority control education, and education thus becomes the key of joining the administrative cadres and to holding positions of power and influence. Weber, however, also highlights the status of those who are educated but not necessarily in positions of power or administrative authority. Here, the educated are seen as valuable and respected members of society, even though they do not occupy seats of power. The educated class, Weber argues, extends support to the state by legitimizing its authority and stabilizing its power. So in return, the state offers them status and privilege. However, the educated class do not only colludes with administrative authority for the sake of acquiring status and privilege, but also has ambitions of being in power and holding positions of administrative authority itself. Therefore, the educated class only supports the state from which it draws power and over which it has some influence. The relationship between the educated class and the appointment to and monopoly over state offices and administrative structures is related to the specific character or nature of education in a society. In the Chinese literati, Weber differentiates the educated class from those whose pursuit of education is tied to objectives other than gaining entry to power-bearing offices. He argues that for some people, the pursuit of education is linked with their pursuit of knowledge. And as in the case of philosophers or in the case of those who choose an education that is not connected to gaining access to offices of power and influence. Weber maintains that education is, in its institutional form, is a means of attaining relative but not absolute power. Education, he says, is a promise of access to and exercise of power in any society. Interesting thought, isn't it? I would keep it in mind even now, right? Hence, Weber is clear that what distinguishes the educated class is its very education and its desire to seek power through this education, and that education as a whole is not necessarily tied to this singular objective. He states that the educated class and its relationship to the state offices and administrative authority is of fundamental importance for the nature of mentality of this stratum. Further, Weber classifies all those who seek to be educated into three groups. This is A, philosophers, who pursue education for the sake of pursuing knowledge. Second, B, educated laymen who employ their education for purposes other than the pursuit of power. And three, specialists who use their education as a means of acquiring exclusive power and ensuring command of knowledge that is of interest to the ruling class and to the political and social elite. Interesting, goddamn interesting, right? Another significant insight that emerges from the Chinese literati is that pedigree played an important role in determining privileged access to education in China. Weber highlights, through the examples of India and China, how superior birth or qualified ancestry ensured direct advantage in education. He argues that superior birth or qualified ancestry socially was seen as proof of inheritance of a natural inclination towards educational success. Most importantly, Weber draws a distinction between those he calls heroes and cultivated men in Chinese society. He argues that heroes are naturally gifted, while cultivated men are those who have been systematically trained. Heroes exhibit extraordinary talent, while cultivated men have carefully acquired pedigrees. Weber shows that the decisive stratum, those with relative status and power in society, has a particular idea of that constitutes cultivation. Anybody can be cultivated, although pedigree does give an advantage in acquiring cultivation. In short, heroes are born while cultivated men are made. Charisma related to heroes cannot be taught, nor can one train to acquire it. In contrast, specialized in expert education seeks to build cultivated men. It trains individuals for practical and administrative purposes, and what this specialized in expert education entails differs according to the decisive stratum's understanding of the idea of cultivation. Hence, a significant contribution by Weber to the study of education is an understanding of the idea of cultivation in accordance with which education has been structured and designed. He illustrates this by suggesting that if a stratum of various form the decisive status in a society, such as in Japanese society, education would attempt to transform pupils into stylized knights and warriors who despise pen pushers. It is thus important in the sociological study of education to link education to the decisive status group in a society and to its ideals of cultivated individual. And Weber then differentiates between cultivating education in general and expert education. Cultivating education, this one like imparting cultural qualification in general terms, seeks to polish an individual, while expert education is aimed at shaping eligible individuals into aspirants for office. The general education, he argues, has been monopolized by political authorities. The two are usually not mutually exclusive, and both are seen as essential. Cultivating education is regarded as crucial for belonging to a status group, while expert education is tied to eligibility for office. What's next? What did he say about bureaucracy and education? Well, Weber's abiding concern with the rationalist way of life led him to reflect on the link between the bureaucracy and education, and which prepares individuals to assume or to be appointed to positions of bureaucracy. His explication of this relationship has been his major contribution to the study of modern complex capitalist societies, and he briefly touches on the nature of education and personal culture in his examination of the processes of educational specialization, degree hunting, and status seeking in a capitalist environment. It is here that he outlines the logic behind the system of examinations for screening or testing for expertise, which then becomes a mechanism for sorting in bureaucratic systems of governance. According to Weber, examinations have a critical purpose, that is, to test and certify a candidate as being eligible to a powerful office. The candidate has to be tested for conformity to a prescribed mental outlook, and this testing of conformities to the prescribed mental outlook is the way by which the powerful have historically controlled education. Weber's observation that democracy fears that examinations and patents of education will create a privileged caste, and for that reason opposes such a system, has proven to be prophetic. What is worth underlining here is that the fundamental characteristic of capitalism society in its bureaucratic nature, and this bureaucratization of capitalism with its demands for expertly trained technicians, clerks, etc., carries examinations all over the world. For Weber, this emphasis on the examination system for the certifying of expertise and for appointment for bureaucratic positions is furthered by the social prestige of the patent of education. And this prestige in turn is converted into economic advantage. And Weber explains that the elaboration of diplomas from universities, business and engineering colleges, and the universal clamor for the creation of further educational certificates in all fields serve the information of a privileged stratum. These elements of the convertibility of educational advantage into social and economic advantage in Weberian thinking are subsequently found in the writings on the convertibility notion of social, economic, and cultural by Pierre Bourdieu. Arguments about the reliance on examinations, elevated status of educational degrees, and associated access to positions of economic advantage are central tenets of the theories of credentialism and social closure, which evolved subsequently into neoliberal theories of conflict. Okay, in the next part of the Weber's, on the Weber, we will talk about functionality of the university and academia according to him. But now that's all. See you in the next video. The link to the next part is below. See ya.